Live from New Hampshire, the Live Free or Die state, comes Uncovering the Truth. 2 hours of mentally stimulating, thought-provoking, morally inspiring, and sometimes maddening talk radio. I'm your host, Dr. Katherine Albrecht, and together we'll be taking a closer look at the forces shaping our lives. Today we're going to be talking about NACE, the National Animal Identification System. We'll be speaking with a Texas attorney and with a small farmer in Washington State, two great ladies who have started and sustained a crusade to protect our freedoms from federal incursion. Our guest this first hour is Judith McGeary, the Executive Director of the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. She's an attorney and also a small farmer. She has a bachelor's degree in biology from Stanford University. She holds a law degree from the University of Texas at Austin. After a clerkship with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, she practiced as an attorney, doing a combination of administrative law, litigation, and appeals. She and her husband now live on a small farm outside of Austin with quarter horses, cows, sheep, and heritage breed chickens and turkeys. After seeing firsthand how government regulations benefit industrial agriculture at the expense of family farms, she became convinced that independent agriculture needed a voice. She quit her legal practice to form the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance in April 2006 after the Texas Animal Health Commission proposed regulations to make premises registration mandatory in Texas. She and her husband are also active with Holistic Resource Management of Texas, the Texas Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, and the Weston A. Price Foundation. Judith, I want to thank you for taking time out from your anti-NACE efforts to join us today. Welcome to Uncovering the Truth.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, now you have quite an amazing personal story. So you went from kind of the high-powered, fast-paced legal life to buying a small ranch and then making activism your life. Tell us a little bit about that transition for you and how you went from high-powered corporate attorney going to Stanford and doing these other things to suddenly becoming one of the preeminent voices on NACE today.
Well, I went into law in the first place because I cared about the environment. My plan was always to go to protect the environment. And at some point in there, I realized if I cared about the environment, what I really needed to worry about was my food supply. Actually, I can thank a professor for pointing that out to me. So I became very involved in sustainable agriculture. And for several years, I just kind of juggled that. One half of my life was this legal career, and the other half of my life was going home and taking care of the turkeys. And being involved in groups and learning more about nutrition and health and agriculture and how it all interrelates. And
Yeah, so you were basically juggling the two simultaneously.
Yes.
And then at one point, I guess one of them had to win out.
Well, basically a little bit over a year ago, just about, I guess almost a year and a half ago now, I learned about the National Animal ID system. And when I really started looking into it, I realized that this was a program that could just do incredible damage to the sustainable agriculture world that I care so much about.
Now, let's jump in and talk about what the National Animal Identification System is. We probably have many listeners who haven't heard about this insidious program, so go ahead and give us the overview and tell us what makes it so scary.
Well, the very short version is it is a plan, a three-step plan, under which everyone who owns even a single livestock animal, and that's right down to anyone who has a pet Shetland pony or a single chicken or, pet pot-bellied pig, would have to register into a government database, both state and federal. They'd then have to identify their animals, in most cases with electronic identification, and then they'd have to report movements, every sale, every show, things like that, to a database within 24 hours.
So this is affecting, if I buy a chicken and just for my local 4-H club or maybe because my kid wants to do a show and tell and show chicks hatching from eggs, I have to report that?
Exactly. It will affect everyone from small farmers and ranchers to homesteaders, people raising their own food, to, like you said, a kid who wants to be in 4-H or somebody who just wants an animal around because they like having animals around.
So when I think about this in terms of sort of looking at the human population, looking at the animal population, from the research that I do, I'm always looking at how these large databases begin to expand and begin to look to sort of collecting information about all aspects of our lives. But isn't this the first time that there's really been even any discussion or any effort sort of systematically to look at livestock and actually issue them, I guess what would be the equivalent of Social Security numbers, birth certificates, death certificates? Is that what we're looking at, sort of turning the animal world into kind of a mirror equivalent of the human world where we're tracking every aspect of their lives?
Well, actually, let me bring a bit more nuance to it, because I want people to understand that we do have some mechanisms already for tracking animals. And I want people to understand that because people are worried, understandably, about animal diseases. So the way this program is being sold is, well, we need to be able to track animals for disease to protect us against diseases. We do have some mechanisms for tracking animals already. These have been very carefully tailored to be limited. They're very specific to the type of disease and the problem we're facing with the certain animal diseases, and so they only affect certain animals, certain people, and they directly deal with the disease problem. What we're facing now is the first widespread, if you own an animal, you're part of this. It's the first time we've left that model where we actually try to address disease and simply do a one-size-fits-all, everything should be tagged and tracked. And that's where it comes in, you're right. Basically, they're looking at Social Security numbers for animals, and that's a really good comparison. It's even more intrusive, though, than a Social Security number. It's bad enough that we have to stick every animal with an identification number, but we then have to report movement. So right now, I don't have to say, hey, I'm going over to my neighbor's to hang out and we're going to go trail riding together. The minute we put this kind of a program in, we're tracking animal movements, which means we're tracking human movements because the animals don't move themselves.
Well, I guess that's right. And now what is the justification for a program of this magnitude?
Well, as I briefly touched on, the state justification is this animal disease concern. We need to track every animal in case there's a disease outbreak. And it sounds really good. This is one of those things that makes a great sound bite, and it's got no substance behind it. First of all, again, we have mechanisms that have worked very well to address animal disease outbreaks as far as tracking. Second of all, as anybody knows, just dealing with human health, sticking a number on an animal and reporting information to a database isn't going to make it healthier. This isn't something that addresses why animals get sick. It's not something that addresses how diseases get introduced into our country. It doesn't address how we treat animals, how we make them better, what we do with them once they're sick. So as an animal health measure, it's nonsense, really. But that's what they're claiming for it.
So now, as an animal health measure, I need to report every aspect of my animals' lives. Now, I'm trying to wrap my mind around this idea of just what an enormous undertaking this would be. I mean, the size of the database required to record all of this information, the amount of effort on the part of farms, on the part of small farmers, even large agribusiness farmers. I mean, this is really the mind boggles at the size of this endeavor. How many? Do we know how many farm animals there are in America that would be impacted by this?
We don't at all. What we do know, we have some sense because there's a census that's done of agriculture every 5 years. But that doesn't catch every animal by any stretch of the imagination. It catches anyone who's in a full-time business of animal agriculture. Just using those numbers, we've got something around 100 million cows in this country. Some 9 or 10 million horses, over 1 million sheep, over 1 million goats, and literally billions of chickens. And like I said, that doesn't capture everyone who happens to have, a few chickens in their backyard for fresh eggs, or 1 or 2 cows for milk, or anything like that. And we know there are large numbers that fall into that sort of a situation.
Well, Judith, when I hear numbers of that magnitude, what immediately pops into my head is, where's the money? Who is making money off of numbering all of those animals?
That's a very, very good thing to go to. It's interesting when you look at how this program was developed. It started as a private industry program by the big agribusinesses, companies like Tyson and pork producers, Cargill, that type of company, and as early as 1994, technology companies. So the companies that are making microchips have been heavily involved in developing this program. The companies that make software, there's a company called Global VetLink, whose entire business model is software systems to track horse movements. That's all it does. And it's been involved in developing this program. And then you have companies and associations that plan to run the databases, because the government has said all along that these databases should be privatized, which means that when we report all of these movements, we're reporting it to a private database, and they're going to get to find a way to make a profit on it.
They always do, don't they? Now, you mentioned microchips, and of course anybody who's followed my work over the last 5 years knows that's sort of my bailiwick. RFID, injectable RFID really is the way they want to implement this numbering system, isn't it?
Well, not necessarily injectable. RFID, yes. Injectable for some species like horses, llamas, alpacas, those will be injected with the microchip. For other species right now, they're proposing that the RFID be buried in a physical, an exterior, like ear tag. And the reason they're doing that, I think, is really because otherwise you run into problems with the microchip migrating, and then when you kill the animal and you have to process it for meat, the question becomes, where's the microchip gone?
Yeah, we actually covered the Supreme Meatpacking Factory in Iowa, I believe. We covered in our book Spy Chips. We talked about how they had to recall something like 1,000 pounds of pork shoulder butts because they had accidentally sent the animals. So this is an experimental herd, which raises a whole other disturbing set of questions about what are we doing eating experimental herds of pigs. But they had sent them through with their glass encapsulated microchips in there. The glass got all ground up and incorporated into the meat that I guess was ground into sausage. And the most disturbing part was that after that recall, they did not manage to reclaim even one single package of that meat, so it went out into the food supply. So I guess that's another question that gets raised is, we instead of securing the food supply, if we're not careful, we're going to wind up making the food supply more dangerous by incorporating these devices into there.
Absolutely. And there's also an indirect effect on our food supply that I think will make it more dangerous. By driving our small farmers and ranchers out of business because of the expenses and the trouble of this program, what we're going to do is be left with a food supply that's completely controlled by these huge corporations. They already have a terrifying amount of control over our food supply, but there are still a few independent farmers out there sort of trying to provide an alternative. When this program goes in, if this program goes in, then the small farmers would be driven out, and the only people left in the food supply business are going to be these huge corporations who have no qualms about doing things like feeding us experimental pigs.
Yeah, and I've even been hearing talk about cloned beef. So, and that's something that a small farmer, I think, that that the normal human in you recoils at the thought of doing that, or eating that, or giving that to your neighbor to eat. But I think the big corporate farmers could care less. It's all about the mighty bottom line. But if they've got so many animals, and if these big, the Cargills and the ADMs and the whoever else is handling on the large scale these animal processing sort of units that are out there, why do they want this? I mean, I would think this would be a huge pain for them to have to chip and monitor all of their animals.
Well, there are two things going on with that. One is, to some extent, they're writing the regulations so it won't be very difficult for them. So, the person with the most gold gets to make the rules. That's the new golden rule. They've written these proposals so that they've got something called a group ID number. And what that is if a group of animals are handled together from birth to death and never commingled outside their production system, and I know that's a very confusing word for most people, but it's a very technical term that they've got, then they can use a group ID. And in practice, what this means are these big confinement operations that have 10,000 hogs, in a building, or, 20,000 chickens all crammed into one building. They won't have to individually ID their animals. They'll get to simply say, well, that building is group number XYZ, and that's all they do. They don't have to individually identify each animal. Now, small farmers and ranchers don't handle their animals in these sort of artificially isolated production systems. And again, sorry for that term, but they don't handle them completely separated from all other animals.
Right.
And so, we don't qualify for group ID. We're stuck individually IDing, and all of a sudden we're stuck with huge paperwork, economic, and labor burdens that the big guys simply won't have. So that's a large part of it. The other part of it is there's a big difference between the companies who are selling the meat and the people who actually own the animals. What you see in the cattle industry, for instance, is even large ranchers who own 1,000 or 2,000 cows, they're not generally the ones who own the meat that then is sold. They sell to feedlots, which fatten them up, and these then sell into these very, very small handful of companies. So these big meat packing companies, by the time the animals get to them, all of the work of tagging and tracking and reporting has been done. It's not their headache. They come in at the stage where the animal is killed, tracking ends, and they simply get to sell it to the consumer and make some money off of it.
So they're really now on the larger scale. It seems like they could automate that, and they've got the money to buy the computer systems, and they got the money to hire the people to set up all the software and to do the implantation, whatever it is they've got to do. How does this affect the small farmer?
For the small farmer, it's a nightmare, to be blunt. We start off at a very basic concept, first of all, that when we have to register our premises, we're not registering some commercial facility. Our premises is our home. For a small farmer. You live on that farm. So I get to register my house into a federal database. So that's the first problem for a small farmer. The second one is it's expensive to buy these tags if you don't get to buy them in bulk. In bulk, they're pretty cheap. Like most things, though, if you only buy a handful of them, they get more expensive per tag. You then have to figure out how to round up all of your animals and tag each and every one of them. And again, like you were saying, the big guys, they've got equipment, they've got this sort of infrastructure where they're used to doing that kind of thing, and they can hire workers to do it. Us, we do it ourselves. And then we're also set, we don't have an administrative staff who files reports for us. Somehow the small farmer is going to have to find yet more time in their day to go file all of these reports every time they buy animals, every time they sell animals, every time they kill a few animals or take them to, for processing to sell to their neighbor. There are going to be all of these time requirements, and, small farmers don't have a lot of extra time on their hands.
No, I think they're some of the busiest people in the country. Now, if my sheep has a lamb, do I have to report that immediately to the federal government?
Under the current proposal, no. Under the current proposal, as long as the animal stays on what they call its premises of origin, which basically means the property it was born on, it doesn't have to go into the system. And so the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, has made a huge deal that if you have animals that are born on the property, never leave the property, and they die on the property, or you kill them just for your own personal consumption, you don't have to ID and track them. Yeah. And they've been repeating this as sort of the answer for the small farmer. And the only person who could think that this was an answer for a small farmer is someone who has never in their life been around a small farm. Small farmers do not have breeding herds and flocks for the most part. Those are expensive. You have extra animals sitting around eating all year round, and all they do is produce new babies. They don't actually directly do something for you. So the vast majority of people who homestead, who raise their own food, who do small local farming, they buy and sell animals. They go pick up some young animals from a local sale or from a neighbor. They sell off their extra. If they do have animals that are breeding and producing young, they sell extra ones. You constantly have animals coming and going on a small farm. So, the small farmers I know, maybe a few of their animals were born on the property, never left the property, and died on the property. But that's a very, very small fraction of the animals that anyone deals with.
Well, and you would still be in the system because to even have started the cycle or to even add to your herd, you'd still have to do the premises registration. You'd still have to let that kind of be on their radar screen. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, so down the road, and, my experience, I guess all of our experience with programs like this is they always start off saying, oh, no, we'll make the exceptions. Oh, no, it's not going to affect you. Don't worry. Look the other way. Pay no attention to what we're doing over here. And then, eventually, when people get used to that, then they do a little kind of step a little further, and eventually, you got all the things that you didn't want in the first place. So,
absolutely. And, yes, even if they instituted it today, and you own 3 chickens because you like having a fresh egg, and you look at this program and you say, you know what, I'm never buying or selling another animal because I'm just not going to be part of this, and those 3 chickens are going to die on my property and they are never leaving it, just the fact that you already own those chickens and they're on your property means you'd have to register your premises.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yeah, no, it's not even that it's triggered by buying. If there's an animal on the property, the program calls for the premises to be registered.
Now, this is reminding me of a phrase that I heard in relation to NACE, the national herd. Can you tell us what that means?
Not really. It's a phrase that appeared in their documents in 2005. They started talking about the national herd. They've never defined it. And frankly, I don't think it has any legal implications. It's not that they're literally talking about nationalizing the herd. But what they are doing with this whole program is taking this approach of, you should do this because it's for the greater good. There's this whole mindset that they're trying to create that anyone who believes in social responsibility and in being proud of this country and what this country's agriculture does, in mom and apple pie, should be favoring this program. It's good for our country. And to me, I think their use of the term national herd sort of just plays into that. Well,
wow, it plays into every Stalinist big brother nightmare I can conjure up. They must not know the demographics they're dealing with here, because small farmers, I got to tell you, of all the people in the country, you know better than I do. These are independent, feisty folks who are not going to, take this kind of thing sitting down.
And they really don't understand that. It's really interesting. I've had a chance to talk to a lot of state officials and U.S. Department of Ag officials through this. I've tried sitting down and talking with them, both to sort of try to understand what it is they're trying to do, trying to understand why they're making these arguments, and to try to communicate to them and explain to them what our problems are and, why they're seeing people like me just completely opposing this with, everything we've got, basically.
Right.
And they don't. It's interesting. I had one conversation with one official that really sticks out. He goes, well, when there's an outbreak, all of y'all people who are saying you're against this program, you'll come crying to us for help. And I asked him, and I said, no, we won't. I said, you don't understand. We've dealt with, we deal with animals dying. We deal with animals, getting hit by a car. I've actually never had an animal die of disease, but I've had animals get injured and die. I've had natural disasters happen. We deal with problems constantly and don't go running to government agencies for help. That is the life of a small farmer. And they literally, I could tell he wasn't trying to be nasty. It was a one-on-one conversation. He had nothing to prove. This is literally how he sees people. When the chips are down, you'll come running crying to the government.
And so we're just trying to save you some of that bother by doing it in advance. We'll just take care of you before the problems come.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it's almost scary that really, I think, is genuine for him. I'd have preferred to believe that he was lying and putting on an act than to believe that this really, he's so set in that perspective, in that worldview of the government takes care of us, and you really secretly want the government to take care of you.
Well, and it's so patronizing and condescending.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of conversation works great with people who've been, government schooled in big cities where if the lights went out for 2 hours, they'd be beside themselves. But, people who are living on farms, working with animals, working with their hands, who are out there on God's green earth, take a different approach to life.
Absolutely. You know, the electricity goes out, you light a few candles, you keep going, and if it goes out for several days, you've got all kinds of backup plans to deal with it.
That's right. And that raises another question, Judith, that immediately when I first heard of NACE, I guess a couple years ago when it was first hitting the radar screen, my first thought was this is about control. This is about all of the people who in 1999 to escape Y2K wanted to go out and live in the woods or live off the land or find a patch of farm somewhere. This is about making sure that you can't do that without the government knowing who you are and where you are. Because how are you going to go and live off the grid unless you have at least some access to animals? And mark my words, I think the next step of this is going to be to register all the crops we grow, too. And they can make the same set of arguments. We need to prevent cross-pollination, blah, 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 genetic modification, Monsanto, whatever it is. There's going to be the same requirement coming down the pike because I think there's a much bigger agenda behind all of this registration and monitoring that we're seeing. It's that now that the tools are available to do it, the dream that has always been the dream of government as far back as human history can go, that dream of being able to have total omniscience over every aspect of your subjects' lives. And that's really why this thing scares me.
Well, it's a very basic concept. If you control the food supply, you control the population. Because this is a survival issue. I mean, not just for the people who are going and living and homesteading. I mean, for anyone, literally, if you don't have food, you don't survive. And so the person or the entity, whether it's corporate or government or any of it, who controls the food supply, literally controls our survival. And it's kind of hard to fight against somebody who controls your survival.
And this program gives them the ability to come on your property and do things, doesn't it?
Actually, what's kind of scary is they already have a lot of that authority. I mean, and I didn't appreciate this until I started looking into the program and understanding what was going on, because my first reaction was, this will give them all kinds of new authority to come onto my property. Well, lo and behold, what I found is even if they never implement NAIS, even if we manage to stop it, we've got a whole nother fight on our hands to try to roll back their power to come onto our property right now. Right now, even without NAIS being fully implemented, if the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes up with an excuse, there's an outbreak happening, they can come onto my property and kill my animals. And I've got no ability to stop them. And that's what we've got right now. So there's a whole nother fight that we're going to have to deal with on that.
Well, and before they kill your animals, they'd probably have to come on your property and take a look at your animals. So this really, by owning animals, animal ownership in this country essentially negates your property rights against government?
To a large extent. I mean, and actually, though, what's also kind of scary, I think, that a lot of us don't appreciate is how far our protections against government invasion have been eroded in every aspect. A lot of us have a gut feeling, a belief that the Fourth Amendment, means you're secure in your home. You're secure against search and seizure. And literally within your house, you've got probably reasonably good protections. I mean, the physical house, right inside it, there's solid protections. Your backyard has very little protection. If they go, let's go take a helicopter and fly really low over everybody's yards, just in case, who knows, someone's growing pot or we just want to see what they're up to, they can do that.
And that's even if you don't have animals. So.
Yeah, that's just right now for all of us.
And
they want to go spy on you, they can, basically. And that's, again, that's a whole other fight. We've got to find a way to bring back some meaning to what most of us think of as being, secure against search and seizure in our homes.
Boy, and you hit a certain point where it's hard to, you can't even think about going back and fixing the things that are already broken. You're so busy stopping them from breaking more. We're speaking with farm and property rights activist Judith McGeary. If you'd like to give us a call to share your own thoughts on the National Animal Identification System or to ask a question of our guest, give us a call. Our number here is 888-202-1984. More after the break.
Great host, great topics. Free speech at its best. This is We the People Radio Network.
And welcome back to Uncovering the Truth. I'm your host, Dr. Katherine Albrecht. We're talking about NACE, the National Animal Identification System. In the next hour, we'll be visiting with Celeste Bishop, a small farmer in Washington State who's been directly affected by this program. Our guest this hour is Judith McGeary, an attorney, farm and property rights crusader, and president of the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. Now, Judith, before the break, we were talking about how the government is sort of expanding its powers of surveillance over all aspects of our lives. And, of course, I've been working on that in the retail sector. We've got people working on that in virtually every front where the encroachment is happening. But you've really stood out as being one of the key voices fighting against NACE nationwide. And I'd like to spend the last half hour we have together here talking about some of the successes, some of the battles that you've fought, some of the frustrations you've experienced, and how people can get involved and maybe join your fight. So let's talk a little bit about what your personal experience has been in trying to fight the system.
It's been a very instructive year and a half. It's been very interesting. What we found was about a year and a half ago, almost no one knew anything about it, and the federal and state governments were really forging, full speed ahead with it. And very rapidly, what was amazing was the different types of people who opposed it. We've got folks who are far right-wing property rights activists, and then we've got good old left-wing hippies left over from the 60s. We've got deeply religious people. We've got deeply secular people. We've got people in every state. We've got small farmers. We've got people who don't own a single animal, but who've just looked at this and said, I don't want my food supply controlled by the government and the corporations. It's been a really amazing movement, and because of that, we've seen real change in the last year. I don't want to overstate that. We are a long, long way from winning, but we've seen the government really have to retrench, really have to change a lot of its rhetoric, at least, if not substance. We've done enough that they've gotten nervous.
Well, and so they at least know that there's some opposition. Do you think they went into this thinking that nobody would care?
Actually, yes. I have a couple of inside sources of information, and my understanding is they really thought that they could just pull this over on people, that we have gotten so used to intrusion, that we've gotten so used to the government just sort of saying, well, here's something else you need to do, here's something else you need to do, that there wouldn't be any real opposition.
Or maybe even in the words of the one guy you were talking to, you drop to your knees and say, thank you.
Yeah, I think that they're just so entrenched in their worldview. And that actually, let me tie in for a minute for a thought I had during the break about something I think they don't understand, but has been, whether it's said in these words or not, really one of the driving forces of the opposition. This is different from anything they've ever done before. We've got all kinds of intrusions happening in all sorts of aspects. But this will mark, if NACE is implemented, it will mark the first time ever that simply owning property of some kind would require you to register with the federal government. There is nothing else in this country that requires you to do that. And once we open that door, once we say that simply the fact that you own X means that you are subject to government registration and surveillance, there's no logical stopping point.
I never thought about that, because even immediately the thought that popped into my head was, well, wait a minute, they know you own your home, but actually they don't. That's your local.
That's local.
Yeah, that's your county.
That's local.
Yeah.
And even something as regulated as guns, and I'm not saying I'm in favor of gun regulation, I'm just pointing out a fact that we all know. Guns are fairly heavily regulated at this point. If I get a shotgun, my grandpappy dies and leaves me a shotgun, I don't have to trot off and file paperwork with the federal government about it.
Right.
There's nothing in this country that is what they will be doing to animals. And so what we've seen is they've gone from a year and a half ago, what they were saying is this program will become mandatory at the federal level. This will be a mandatory nationwide program by 2008 was the initial plan. Then there was a little hemming and hawing, and they said, well, it'll be voluntary, but with 100% participation by 2009. Which
what
the
is
translation was, it'll be mandatory by 2009. And now what they've done is they said, well, at the federal level, at a national scale, it's a voluntary program. But you, states, you can do whatever you want. And by the way, here's some money, but you'll only keep getting money if enough people sign up into the program. So
nothing like putting the screws to the state government.
Exactly. And they're not telling the state governments it has to be mandatory, but everybody understands that if you have a voluntary program and no one signs up for it, your federal dollars are going to stop.
Wow. All right. And hasn't that been the way that they've done just about everything? I mean, even seatbelt compliance. You know, it's if you don't, it's up to you whether you do it. But if you don't do it, we'll cut off all of your federal road money. And so the government is basically taxing us, taking our money, and then giving it back to us if we comply, and then calling our compliance voluntary.
Exactly. It's the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit all over again.
Absolutely.
And so that's sort of the big picture of where we are. I do want to say, I mean, although the substance is still very much, it's still very dangerous. I mean, what you and I are just saying, this is how they put through programs. I think it is significant that they've gone from simply blazoning out there, we want a mandatory program and we're going to have it by 2008, to sort of having to do this sort of backdoor, well, no, we're not going to make it mandatory, don't worry. It shows that they're worried about us. Well, it's a long way from winning, but they're worried.
And tell us some of the things that you've done to scare them.
Well, a lot of it has just been education. People start writing and calling their legislators, and the legislators' initial reactions, and this is both the state and the federal level, was, national what? What are you talking about? And then what's happened is the legislators have gone, after getting enough phone calls, and started asking around, what is this program that, the people I represent are so unhappy about? And they start finding out about it. I mean, what's amazing is how many congressmen and how many state representatives and senators had no idea what this program was.
Yeah, that's been my experience in New Hampshire, too.
Yeah, it's been incredible. And because what happened is this is really an industry program. I think, a chunk of the places where we've lost our freedoms didn't initiate with government. It initiates with large corporations, who then get the government to put their ideas through. And so the government did what they usually do. They listened to the industry groups who said, we want this program. They didn't hear anyone saying anything different, so they put the program through. So first of all, we caused some questioning on the part of the elected representatives. We've also caused, to a small extent, and we need to keep growing this, a rebellion within the industry and organizations that are pushing for this. So, for instance, I'll speak from just a personal example. American Quarter Horse Association has been involved in developing this program. I'm a quarter horse owner. I had no idea my association was developing this program. I am not the only person to now be quitting the association over this. We've had a lot of Farm Bureau. American Farm Bureau has been heavily involved in developing this program. There are quite a few people who have quit Farm Bureau over this. Now, in comparison to the number of members they have, it's still a tiny percentage. But it's growing. And, of course, membership is what gives them money. And so the more we reach people, the more people learn about this program, and they go and demand answers from their elected officials, and they go and demand answers from the associations who are supposed to be representing their interests, the more we see maneuvering on this, the more we see some response.
Well, great. And, I know from experience when they put together these commissions to study, you name it, the only people there that are represented, I mean, they typically don't tend to invite the little guy. They typically don't tend to invite us. They tend to invite, the corporate interests and the heads of the big organizations. And, it can be a little bit disorienting, I think, for some of these organizations when they get into these groups and they're meeting with the Washington lobbyists and they're meeting with the corporate heads, and it all starts sounding so normal, so obvious that of course, and then when you take that back to your constituency and they want to, tar and feather you, I think it's only then that you get the wake-up call and you say, wait a minute, I'm the one who's been living in a dream world. This is not going to fly. So, and for that, I think, the whole nation owes you and your fellow activists a huge debt of gratitude, because we wouldn't even know this was going on if it weren't for your efforts. Now, I know in the state of Texas, where you are based, you've got a big fight coming up. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. The situation in Texas is we have a statute. Unfortunately, let me rephrase that. The Texas legislature, without any of us knowing about it, back in 2005, passed a statute that allows the agency here in Texas to make NAIS mandatory anytime it wants to. And that is sort of how I got into this fight, is the agency proposed to make the premises registration mandatory using its powers under the statute. Now, we got the agency through public outcry to back off, but that doesn't change their power. Right now, that agency can turn around and make the entire program mandatory anytime they want to. So we worked with legislators in this session, and we got several bills introduced. The leading bill is something called House Bill 461. And what this would do is it would take away the agency's authority to make the program mandatory. And it's been stalled for quite some time, but it has just been set for a vote, which means on Monday morning or afternoon, we're not sure the exact time, but sometime on Monday, the Texas House of Representatives will be voting yes or no on House Bill 461. So this is a really critical moment for everybody to call their representatives.
So if I'm in Texas and I've been listening to this interview and I agree completely that this is a horrible program, and I don't know how anybody could listen and not think that, what do I need to do right now? It's Friday morning. I have a couple of hours left to the business day. What can I do? How do I find out who to call? How do I know where to go? And what do I say when I make that phone call?
Okay, the easiest thing is to call the Capitol switchboard. The phone number, and I'll give it multiple times, is
so everybody grab a pen. Here, let's give them a second. Okay, Capitol switchboard.
The Capitol switchboard number. The number is 512-463-4630. And what happens when you call is there'll be, a receptionist, and you say, here, I need to know who my representative is. Here's my address. And you give them your address, and they'll say, you are represented by so-and-so. And again, that number to call the Capitol switchboard is 512-463-4630. And they can even connect you. Once they tell you who your representative is, you can say, could you connect me to their office? And they'll put you right through to their office. And there's actually a two-part message that we want delivered to every representative. The first one is very simple. It's vote yes on House Bill 461. That's the simple part. It's a little more complicated because there's going to be a floor amendment, which means the bill, one of the representatives is going to introduce an amendment to the bill, and we actually want this amendment. Because what this amendment does is it will prevent the government from misusing the word voluntary. And my guess is Celeste will talk a great deal about this because it's one of the issues she and I are very concerned about. But in brief, what happened is the government has twisted the word voluntary out of every normal meaning. It's nothing any of us would recognize. So they consider it voluntary if they can tell you, oh, yeah, it's voluntary, but if your kid's in 4-H, you have to be in the program. Or, oh, yes, it's voluntary, but here's a sheet of paper with fine print that you haven't read, and if you stick your name on it, you're in the program and you can't get out. So what the floor amendment does is it stops the misuse of the word voluntary. It makes it what I call a truly voluntary program where people can't be lied to or coerced into it. So the two-part message is we want them to vote yes on House Bill 461, and we want them to vote yes on the floor amendment.
Now, is there only going to be one floor amendment? Do they need to identify the floor amendment?
The best way to identify it is It'll be introduced by either Representative Miller or Representative Gallego. Those are the two people. I'm not sure which of those two will be introducing it. They've both been very staunch allies of ours. And if people, I know this is a lot of info for people to try to get down. If people have Internet access, we have this information on our website, which is www.farmandranchfreedom.org. And we've got action alerts on the website, and all of this is in our action alerts. But, again, the amendment would be introduced by either Representative Miller or Representative Gallego.
So let me get this. They're going to call the Capitol switchboard. This is only for people in Texas. You're going to call the Capitol switchboard, give them your address, and ask who your representative is. Ask to be connected. You're going to get probably a secretary or a voicemail or something when you call that number. And then you're going to say, vote. Go, take it from there, Judith.
Then you say, I want you to vote yes on House Bill 461, and I want you to vote yes on the floor amendment that will be introduced by Representative Miller or Representative Gallego to add protections so that this is a truly voluntary program.
Gotcha. And now what will it mean if this passes through the House? Has it already been through the Senate? What's its next step after that?
Unfortunately, it has not been through the Senate. So what will happen after it's been through the House is it will go to the Texas Senate. And we've got about 5 weeks left in session, and this is when life gets very interesting and very hectic at the Texas Capitol. So it will have to go to a committee in the Senate, probably the Natural Resources Committee. We'll get it, hopefully, through committee, and then it will have to go to a vote by the full Senate. And then, of course, we go to the governor.
So people will need to do this essentially twice, but the key, we need to get it through the House first on this Monday vote. So people now have about 6-7 hours left to the day to make this phone call. So I would urge people to do that. If you didn't follow all the information, if you didn't have a pen, if you're driving in your car, Judith, where can people go to find this information on your website?
Actually, I'll go ahead. I'll add a new page this afternoon right on the front. But right now they can also go to articles and alerts, and we've got action alerts on that page. And
your website is farmandranchfreedom.org.
Exactly.
Farmandranchfreedom.org. All right, so that's a crucial way. Now, what if people are not in the state of Texas? What can they do in their own states? What's happening on a national level?
On a national level, there is a lot happening, and let me give you one more website to recommend for people, since I know we'll run out of time before I can cover all of it. It's Liberty ARC. Liberty as in the word liberty, ARC as in ARK.net. LibertyARC.net. They can go there and they can click on their state. We have a section called State-by-State Activities. And then you click on your state and it'll tell you what's going on in your state. Because Texas is not the only state that's got bills going through. We've got a lot happening in a lot of different states, some good, some bad. Missouri, the Senate just passed a bill that would completely bar NACE. It's a wonderful step, but now it'll have to go to the Missouri House. So the fight's not over yet. In Arizona, we got a bill through the House and the Senate that's similar to the Texas House bill, but now soon it'll have to go to the governor. Tennessee, Louisiana, Massachusetts, these all have bills that have been introduced, taking different approaches to trying to roll back the NAIS program. And we'll need people, calling and writing their legislators in those states. And so there's activity in a lot of different states. And even for those where there isn't activity in terms of having a bill in your state, I'd encourage folks to look at this as a long-term fight. This program has been developed. The industrial ag companies and the technology companies have been working on this program for almost 20 years. The fight against it isn't going to be over in the next 2 months. No matter what happens to any of these bills, the fight's not going to be over, anytime soon. And
now, and based on how hard you're all fighting, is this going to become a reality in 2008? What's your gut?
I think we've certainly derailed their timeline.
Good.
I think there's no question that we have derailed the timeline on this, and bought ourselves time to keep fighting it. But it's touch and go as to whether we win this. We're going to have to fight at the state level and the federal. But
But what's happening on the federal level? We haven't talked about that yet.
The federal level, right at this moment, is quiet, but we expect there'll be a lot of fighting over the summer. We've got people on both sides. We've got some congressmen who absolutely support NAIS and are upset that it hasn't become mandatory yet. They're appalled. This should be mandatory already. Congressman Peterson from Minnesota is kind of leading that charge. And then we've got representatives on our side, congressmen on our side, who are saying this program should not be happening. And so there's one bill that's been filed by a Missouri congresswoman, and it's kind of sitting there. It's not a bill anybody wants to jump on. And I expect there'll be multiple bills being filed over the next few months. And it should really heat up over the summer.
And now this is all information that you post on your website at farmandranchfreedom.org?
Exactly. It's on both farmandranchfreedom.org and it's on libertyarc.net.
Liberty Arc. And who runs Liberty Arc?
Liberty Arc is a group of us that got together about a year ago, specifically to form a single-purpose coalition. The only purpose is to fight NACE. And the idea was to have as broad of a coalition as possible. So this is really where it's been astounding to me, working with people who are at the far opposite ends of the spectrum, politically, people who would never generally speak to each other civilly. Well, we're all very good at being civil, but who would certainly never hang out with each other, except that we all agree on this. And so it's become a clearinghouse for sort of coordinating the state fights. We've got state coordinators in about 20 states, and so it's for sort of clearinghouse for information so that people can find out what's happening in their state and find out what's happening nationally.
So, and that's libertyarc.net. Liberty Arc, A-R-K, like Noah's Ark, right?
Exactly.
libertyarc.net. And now, if people want to join your organization or contribute money or help you out, what can they do to encourage you in your fight? Because I'm sure giving up a lucrative law career and becoming a full-time activist, as I can definitely attest, is not the fast road to making money. So how can people help fund you?
Well, we've got membership. And it starts as little as $10 a year. I mean, we want members, both because of funding. We need funding. It costs money to print flyers. It costs money to, do the phone calls to answer people's questions. Nothing runs without some funding. And because we need members. Because when we go talk to Congress or when we go talk to the state legislators, they'll ask us, how many members do you have? Because that translates to how many votes do they need to worry about.
You got it.
So it's really important to us to have members. So they can go to our website, and we've got the membership form. There's actually a Join FARFA button. And you can download the membership form or you can join online. People can also, whether they join or not, I'd ask that everyone sign up for email alerts.
And those are free?
Those are free on both Liberty Arc and FARFA. Email alerts are free because we want people to have information and to do something.
And just to clarify, FARFA is Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. That's your abbreviation, right? Okay,
yeah,
I was going to say that's a mouthful. Okay, so people can go on there. They can get your free newsletter. They can send you $10 and join. And I'm a big believer in cash. Can I just tuck $10 in a thank you card or a happy birthday card and throw it in the mail to you?
Absolutely. People can tuck cash into a card. If you want to be listed as a member, which I like having, again, because having more members helps us, download the membership form or at least just give me your name and address,
Okay. Okay.
If you want to do anonymous donations, I'll take that too. But,
right.
And by the way, we don't share our membership list with anyone. I've been asked that, and it astounded me because we're fighting so hard for privacy and property rights that I couldn't believe people would have to worry about it, but I guess we do nowadays.
It is, and when you hear that large groups like the ACLU and even the Terry Schiavo Support Foundation, that they were caught selling their mailing lists, I'm appalled.
Oh, God.
I mean, just, we're not super computerized over here, and I spend all my days and nights, fighting the people who do that. And then when people say, you're not going to sell my name, I'm thinking, I'd sooner slit my own wrist than sell your name.
I know. People have absolute permission to come lynch me if I am ever caught selling our membership list.
Amazing.
I can't imagine it.
Well, we do live in that time where I guess it's something, we've got to completely reiterate. But, I can vouch for you. I know you, and I definitely can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing. Our guest this hour has been Judith McGeary. She is one of my favorite people working out of Texas and protecting our rights against federal government intrusion. You've been listening to Uncovering the Truth with Katherine Albrecht. We'll be back after this break to hear from Celeste Bishop, a small farmer in Washington State who's made fighting NACE a full-time job as well. Stay tuned.
News, politics, cover-ups, government corruption. You're listening to We the People Radio Network, WTPRN.
And welcome back to the second half of Uncovering the Truth. I'm your host, Dr. Katherine Albrecht. We're talking this program about NACE, the National Animal Identification System, and in the next hour we'll be speaking with Celeste Bishop, a small farmer in Washington State who's been directly affected by this program. But before we get started, in our conversation in the last hour with Judith McGeary, one of the things that came up was the issue of control and what it means for the federal government to have this level of surveillance power over the very food that we eat. And I, of course, got started in my fight for privacy and for civil liberties and all the things that I've been working on since 1999 over the issue of food registration when you scan the innocent or innocuous seeming little supermarket frequent shopper card at your grocery store, that I discovered that essentially a vast database of information about our food purchases was being collected. And now when I look at these further trends towards not just looking at the food that we buy at the supermarket, but sort of moving to the next step and looking at the food that we raise for ourselves, the food that we grow on our own property, the animals that we raise to provide food for our families, that whole specter of government control over the food supply that Judith was talking about comes just very clearly to me. And I want to read a passage before I introduce Celeste from our book Spy Chips, How Major Corporations and Government Plan to Track Your Every Move with RFID. This is, of course, the book that I co-authored with Liz McIntyre, my extraordinarily talented co-author. And we've got a section in the book. We sort of talk through the book about surveillance of various aspects of our lives, RFID tags embedded in clothing and shoes, and the ability of the government to essentially down the road, if we allow them to even want to snoop around in the contents of our own refrigerators or what's on the medicine cabinets in our bathrooms. And in looking at that, the question that we wanted to raise is really what's the harm? I mean, obviously, we all have a desire for privacy. Nobody wants anybody snooping around in their personal effects. But, really, what's the harm? And so I want to read something that kind of segues and ties those two things in. Both the issue of surveilling our food supply and the issue sort of big government observation and surveillance. This is on page 215 from a chapter called The Nightmare Scenario in Spy Chips. It would take an army to kill 7 million people in a single winter, as Stalin did with a state-induced famine in the Ukraine in 1932 to 33. Stalin first confiscated all the Ukrainian seeds, so they couldn't plant crops or store food for the winter. Then he sent troops to search barns and cellars for hidden grain or hoarded food. Finally, when winter came, he ordered the military to close the borders and prevent food from reaching the people. At one point, Ukrainian villagers, Stalin's subjects, were dying at the rate of 25,000 per day. That's more than 1,000 people per hour, 17 people per minute. These statistics should give us pause before we implement an infrastructure that could allow the government to monitor and control everything, especially our food. And there's a box on this page I also want to read. Does surveillance keep people safe? The argument, it seems, that every time a new government intrusion, a new surveillance program, a new, we just want to keep you safe. We want to take a look at this one thing. We want to record, make a database, prescription drugs, whatever it is. There's always the sort of safety argument that comes up. And, of course, we're hearing this in the National Animal Identification System, that the government needs this system in order to keep you safe from animal diseases. And we've heard so much about bird flu and mad cow disease. And, we're just your friends. All we want to do is make sure by watching everything that we can keep you safe. Well, let me read a box from page 215 of Spy Chips. The title is, Does Surveillance Keep People Safe? One of the most surveilled people in all of history were the Soviets under communist rule. During Stalin's decades-long reign of terror and the KGB era that followed, government agents could intercept and read mail, listen in on phone calls, and plant informants to probe their neighbors' political views and assess their loyalty to the state. The surveillance was near complete, but did the watchful eye of the state keep the Soviet people safe? Hardly. It seems no coincidence that history's most watchful regime was also one of its most deadly. Between 1917 and 1987, the Soviet government killed over 60 million of its own citizens, more than any other government in the 20th century. So really what this boils down to is your model, your threat model. Ultimately, history has shown us time and time again that when governments want to control something, they begin by monitoring it and recording it, and that when governments actually obtain the power to control things, they generally turn corrupt and they become abusive to their own citizenry. So that's the reason why I think it's so crucial that when we have programs like NACE, regardless of even the potential legitimacy of some of the arguments of the people proposing this, that we really need to look long term. What will this mean for our children? What will this mean for our grandchildren? What will it mean to live in a country where your every sneeze and sniffle will be monitored by the authorities, where, every time an egg hatches in your backyard, somebody somewhere, a computer somewhere will be watching? What ultimately will that mean? And I think ultimately it's going to mean tyranny. Our guest this hour is Celeste Bishop, crusader for the simple joys of good food, small farming, and property ownership in America. Celeste is the mother of 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren. In the 1990s, she and her husband decided to live a healthier lifestyle, so they found some beautiful forested acreage in the Cascade foothills of Washington State and purchased 2 milk goats, 7 laying hens, 2 rescue cats, and a Cocker Spaniel. Then one day in 2005, Celeste received a USDA agriculture survey in the mail and noticed something very odd about it. She and her family were soon thrust from the tranquil farming life into a daily crusade opposing the big government and large agribusiness partnerships that make up the National Animal Identification System, or NACE. Celeste has been very busy researching, educating, uniting, and mobilizing outraged citizens across the country who are concerned with the dangers of intrusive government farming regulations that undermine our privacy, our property, our food supply, and that eventually may threaten our very lives. She gets the word out on agricultural issues on her blog at NoNaceWA, or NONAIS for NoNace, WA for Washington.org, and she also works closely with the national group NoNace.org. In this hour, Celeste will take us on a shocking journey through the intrigue on the NACE program, a convoluted web of government partnerships, international agreements and treaties, RFID microchip implants, and Orwellian doublespeak that threaten both our constitutional rights and our privacy. Hello, Celeste, and welcome to Uncovering the Truth.
Good morning, Catherine.
It's such a thrill to have you on this program, Celeste. I consider you among one of my dearest friends, even though you're on the other side of the country and we've never met in person. Every time I talk to you, I'm applauding and cheering. Yay! There's another woman out there making a huge difference in the world. I remember our very first conversation, Celeste, when I asked you, how did you find out about this? And you told me this amazing story about receiving this letter in the mail. And rather than spoil it for our listeners, I'm going to let you jump in and tell that story to them yourself.
Well, basically, I was on the way to a friend's wedding, and I noticed I was just going through the mail, as I usually do, and I noticed a survey from the National Agriculture Statistical Service, NASS, and it had a barcode at the top, and it had our farm name, it had my husband's name, and then it was asking for 4 pages of personal information, and something in my gut just said, you need to call and find out where they got this information, because we're a non-commercial farm, we're just hobbyists. So when I got home from my friend's wedding, I called the federal government, and I said, where did you get this information? And they said, oh, you must have got feed at the feed store. And I said, no, not with this information. And so then they said, well, you must have got vet supplies through a veterinary catalog. And I said, no, not with this information. So they said, well, why don't you call your state Department of Ag? And so I did. And basically, they put me through to what they called a statistician. And this lady, it was in the days before there was any opposition really to NACE, because nobody knew what NACE was. And so she was very proud of her program. And she sang like a songbird, and I diligently took notes during our conversation, only to discover that we were classified as a farm. And I'd like to go through something with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so would you think that you are living on a farm?
No. Okay. I don't have any animals, and I don't plant any crops.
Okay. Do you have plants on your property?
Yes. But nothing I eat, but yes.
Okay.
Actually, we have blackberries. They grow naturally along a fence, so I guess we have something we could eat. But yeah.
Okay. Do you have potential to earn $1,000 in a year?
Off of my property? Not that I'm aware of, but I'd love to hear about it if I did.
Well, almost anybody can grow a few herbs in a pot, or have like a little baby pool with some vegetables in it.
Okay.
And that would mean, if you have potential to earn $1,000, you would be classified as a farm and would have to register your property as a premise in the National Animal Identification System, not even having one animal.
You mean not if I am earning $1,000, but if I have the potential to earn $1,000?
Yes, if you have the potential, not that you are engaging in it, but that you have potential.
Well, that's virtually anybody with a plot, a quarter-acre plot or bigger in the country.
Right, and that is one of the first questions in the survey that I received. It says, do you rent or own property? So if you rent or own property, you are a candidate to be put into the NACE database.
Unbelievable. So they actually could use this as a foot in the door to then say, well, tell us about the plants growing on your property then. Tell us about I don't know, the crickets in your trees. I mean, they could use this to talk about anything.
Yes.
Huh. Okay. And I want to back up, because the part of the story you just told that I found so amazing and that segued with the research that I've been doing was this notion that they asked you must have bought food at a feed and grain store. Were you actually led to understand that they somehow obtained the records of people who had bought food at feed and grain stores and used it to identify the farmers in the state of Washington?
Actually, in 2002, they passed a federal law, the Bioterrorism Act of 2002, which required feed stores to inform to the federal government what purchases were being made.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
So every feed, you mean even the little local, a tiny little falling down shack down the street that sells, tack and rope and cat food and chicken food, they have to report their sales?
Yes. I actually have a copy of the letter that we obtained under the Freedom of Information Act that went out to the various feed stores, and it's posted at nonaswa.org. So you filed a Freedom of Information Act request to find out how they had obtained the information from the feed and grain stores? I just did a general request to the Washington State Department of Ag for everything that they had on the National Animal Identification System. And I was horrified. I had to limit the time span, so I limited it to 3 years. And Washington State Department of Ag responded and said, are you sure you want all the documents in the last 3 years on NACE? And I said, yeah. And they said, do you realize that is 400,000 documents in the last 3 years? So just our state alone has been very busy on this program.
400,000 documents, not pages, but documents, not words, not letters, but documents?
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
And that's one state. That's just one state. Now, what kind of? I'm sure that was a gold mine. What else was in there?
So far, we have about 6,000 pages from both Washington State Department of Ag and the USDA, the Federal Department of Ag. Everything from some of their contracts to the letters to the feed store. their plans, their timeline, depopulation, voluntary depopulation of animals.
What is that?
Let me give you a for instance. We test our goats annually to make sure that they're disease-free for CAE. It's a disease that's known in milk goats. And so every year we know it as the Great Goat Roundup. So everybody gets together with their goats and the vet comes out and tests. Well, this year was very unusual. 6 goats tested positive for the disease. That's very unusual because never, ever before in the past has that ever occurred. Well, I just got an email that said, I can't remember the state. I think it's Wyoming. Somebody had sheep, and they tested positive for scrapie. So that farm is voluntarily going to send all their animals to be depopulated, which means they're going to be killed. And they may or may not be ill.
Now, is this voluntary in the sense that Judith was talking to us in the last hour, where voluntary has been completely redefined to mean sort of mandatory?
Right. I started working with the Ag Law Center from Arkansas last spring, and I worked with a man named Chuck, and he gave me a heads up that the agriculture terms that we commonly use are being redefined, and he said that by the end of last year that process would be complete and he would give me a heads up. Well, sure enough, in December he did give me a heads up on that, and right now I have 60,000 pages of words that have been redefined, including the word voluntary.
So how do you redefine a word like voluntary?
Well, the glossary that Chuck has composed is used by the U.S. Senate, and it means financial incentive, and to accept part of the package is to accept the whole package.
So voluntary means I say yes to item A in this alphabet list, and by doing so, I've now said yes to B through Z, and I'm now compelled to comply with those because of my voluntary acceptance of A?
Right, and usually there's a financial incentive, and what people don't understand is that this can be a very subtle form of financial incentive. They're going to pay you for your private information because then they can legitimately do with it what they want. So like in Nebraska, you will get popcorn, a pair of vice grips, or a keychain as payment for your private information so that they can enter that into the database.
So it's kind of that whole legal idea that you have to have consideration. You get $1 in exchange for something or other to make the contract binding. So, but here it's a keychain or a popcorn.
Right, and of course they're not going to tell you that that's what is going on, but that is in fact what's happening.
So it's like selling your birthright for a bowl of porridge, huh?
That's it.
It's the same idea, yeah, for this keychain.
Or a bag of popcorn.
Oh, my gosh, yeah, I let the government come in and strip me of all my constitutional rights, and all I got in exchange was this stupid keychain. Is there a T-shirt yet in Nebraska?
No T-shirts yet.
Oh, my gosh, well, you could probably do a swift business selling those. I can't believe it. All right, so that now I'm still fixated. I'm still stuck on this idea of them going to the feed and grain stores. So you're going to have to help me out here. Okay. This was a terrorism measure?
Yeah.
What in the world could your local feed store selling you some chicken scratch have to do with terrorism?
Well, they said that a popular PowerPoint that is often used by the USDA and the various state ag departments they said that in the caves of Afghanistan they found evidence that Al-Qaeda was going to hit our food supply. And so the federal government responded by putting in protection measures, one of which was the Bioterrorism Act of 2002.
And so this is a federal requirement that all feed and grain stores in the United States do exactly what?
That they turn over records of the purchases made by their customers. and then it goes into a database. And what happens from there, I don't know.
Well, this is assuming that the customers identify themselves. Is there now a requirement that you have to show ID to buy animal feed?
Not animal feed, but most people pay with their credit card, and so everything is linked.
Yeah, well, that's what I've been railing against for how many years now. And if I were to have an animal, which I don't, but this is actually making me want to get one just so I can refuse to register. I would walk into the feed and grain store and I would pay cash and walk out again. In fact, I might even drive to another town where they wouldn't even know me. And maybe even park in such a way they couldn't see my license plate and walk in and buy my 100 pounds of chicken chow and walk out again. So I guess that people like me, the holdouts who pay cash for things, are actually going to start feeling the screws get put to them here shortly.
And here in Washington, I've been noticing an increasing trend of people using cash. You still have to show ID. And like at our grain store, when I go down there, they know who I am. So on the ticket, they'll write my name on it, even though I'm paying cash.
Wait, so they're identifying people even who pay cash. So
yes.
they're writing this up on a ticket. Even though you're walking in now, are they delivering it to you? Do they need to know where to put it?
No. Well, actually, in the Bioterrorism Act of 2002, it does address if certain requirements of, what you have on your property as far as storage. Do you store hay? Do you store grain? And we're supposed to be reporting that too. And I have a good friend named Pat, whom you know also. And basically under the requirement, she would have to say that she's got X and X tons of hay and X and X tons of goat grain.
Even if she grows it on her own property, if she cuts her own hay, if she's got a big field and she hays it at the end of the season, does she have to report that?
I believe that I might be in error, but I believe that the Act does cover that anybody that stores any type of food is required to report.
Any type of food for animal consumption, right?
Yes.
Wow. I had not realized that had progressed as far as it had, and that stems back to an act in 2002.
Yes.
And what is that act called again? I'll look that one up.
The Bioterrorism Act of 2002.
And is anybody working on that, on getting the word out to people about that act that you're aware of?
Well, several of us have been talking about it and incorporated into the activism that we do. It's a slow process because it's a very large act. It deals with a whole lot of intricacies. It's over 100 pages, so it's a lot to digest. Well,
and you've kind of become the expert at doing that with, 400,000 documents about to land on your doorstep from your FOIA request. So has your approach to this really been doing the investigation and then getting the word out? What else are you doing there in Washington?
Well, we're so excited. We have a blog up now, which will house is housing the documents that we're getting. So the public the folks don't have to take our word for it. They can actually see the documents in black and white for themselves, which I think is an exciting opportunity for everyone.
Now, when you file a FOIA request, are you at liberty then to disseminate, to photocopy and put that information up on a website and make it available to the public?
Yes.
Great. So all of these 400,000 documents you're about to get, you're going to put them up there, whichever ones are relevant. We probably don't want to see everything. But you're able to put those up, and there's really nothing that the government can do to prevent that. Fantastic.
Yes. Other people have done that, too, so we're not the only ones.
Now, what are some of the juicy nuggets that we can be looking for in coming months? Well,
the latest acquisition was 434 pages on the depopulation of swine and poultry. And we are just about ready to submit a FOIA to the federal government on depopulation of horses and cattle. So we're really looking forward to that one. And then also concluding our PDA, which is a public disclosure request to the Washington State, and getting the rest of the documents that were promised.
Fantastic. Celeste, we've got a caller. Malcolm in Texas is on the line. I think he's been hanging for a little while. Why don't we bring him in? And Malcolm in Texas, go ahead. You're on the line with Celeste Bishop, a small farmer and activist in Washington State. Hi, Malcolm. Are you there? Hang on. I'm figuring out how to make this work. Here we go. Malcolm, can you hear us?
Hello?
Malcolm in Texas. You're on the air with Celeste Bishop and Katherine Albrecht. Go ahead.
Well, it's very interesting because I didn't call in. I don't know how that got rerouted. I don't know how that happened.
Okay.
I just tuned in, so I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry about that. That's our apologies. We're speaking with Judith McGeary, who is an activist in Texas working on the NACE, National Animal Identification System, in the last hour, and she had some tips on her website at farmandranchfreedom.org for some important legislation that's going to be voted on Monday to get the state of Texas out of the National Identification System. And then
I'm all for that. I'm all for that. I know about that. I've heard about Judith and her fine work. It's just another government-controlled ploy. I find I have to look really hard, and I come up with a loss when I try to find out any good the government is up to. I can see a lot of bad, example, Virginia Tech, PSYOPs. So, it's just any way we can fight these horrible, evil, lowly creatures that are reigning over us, we need to do it. And I mean, we need to do it.
Well, thanks for the call, Malcolm. I appreciate your encouragement. We've been talking with two absolutely fantastic grassroots activists who have left their regular lives and devoted themselves full time to working very specifically on this. So thanks for your call, Malcolm. And go to farmandranchfreedom.org to find information about what you can do there in Texas, how you can call your local representatives and get them to vote the right way on this bill that's coming up on Monday. So, Celeste, we were talking about we were talking about the documents that you found and have been placing up on your website. Can you give out that web address again so people can go there during the break and take a look at what you've been doing online? It's
nonaiswa.org, NONAISWA.org.
Great. Thanks for that. Do you have an email newsletter that goes out also from your website? Can people sign up for it on there?
Yes.
And go ahead. What do they need to do to get on your email list?
You just put in your name and your email address, and then about once a week I'll send out a newsletter.
And for people in Washington State, this would probably alert them to Washington State bills and legislation that they can get active on. Do you have information for people in other parts of the country, or can you recommend a website for them to go to?
nonaise.org basically is the hub for that almost everybody looks to for national action. Although our website primarily houses documents, so if you're researching and you want some information because you're going to write a letter to the editor, you're going to talk to your representative or senator, you're going to talk to the media, then our site would be a good place to check out because ours is national information and documents.
And so now you got those from the state of Washington, but you also obtained federal documents in your FOIA request as well?
Yes.
And I know you're filing additional FOIA requests, so we can keep an eye out for that. And that's going to be a goldmine for, I would think, even academic researchers who want to find out what's behind this program. So you've got information both for sort of the curious to kind of poke around, and also for people who are researching this for a living. And obviously for the activist community, I'm sure this has been a great resource for Judith and Mary Zanoni and other people around the country who've been working on this issue. So that's a fantastic resource, and we're really grateful to you for putting all that up there. We're coming up on a commercial break here. We've been speaking with farm and property rights activist Celeste Bishop. If you'd like to give us a call to share your own thoughts on the NACE animal registration system or to ask a question of your guest, give us a call. Our number is 888-202-1984. More after the break.
Great host, great topics, free speech at its best. This is We the People Radio Network.
And welcome back to Uncovering the Truth with Dr. Katherine Albrecht. Our guest this hour is Celeste Bishop, farming rights crusader and I guess now investigative researcher. Celeste, I want to ask you about the RFID connection. This is something that I've been researching for years, and I know that you have some concerns about the use of microchips and particularly injecting them into animals. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found on that topic?
Well, basically, I started to do some research on the Department of Defense documents through the GAO, the Government Accounting Office. And basically, even the Government Accounting Office was concerned with privacy, when you use an RFID, electronic collision, the cloning, the hacking. There's a 30% failure rate by the time that the RFID would be applied. So that's like a third of the, it's not very reliable. I guess one of my biggest concerns is the electronic collision, given that we have all this electromagnetic microwaves, cell phones in the air. And I have a cute little story to tell you. I was back east getting some training, and when I came home, my husband had blown up a taco in our microwave, and so I had to do a kitchen remodel, so we went out and got new kitchen appliances, and I got a stove. Well, I would go to work in the morning, put a chicken in, and when I came home, the chicken was raw, and I thought, well, I must be really busy, in the morning, and I forgot to turn the oven on. Well, as time went on, I discovered that I had turned the oven on. And there were times that the oven started to turn off right in front of my very eyes, and it's one of these push-button ovens. And so the appliance repair people came out and replaced everything 3 times. Finally, the end of the warranty came, and they said, we don't know what's wrong with this thing. And so I called the power company out, and they put a monitor on our power to see if we were having power fluctuations. And the engineer came out, and he said, no, you've got clean power. We really don't know what's going on. And I said, what about those 2 microwave towers at the top of our hill? And he said, that's your problem. He said, those 2 microwave towers, when they send out a certain frequency, it will do one of 2 things. It will turn your oven off, and it will open somebody's garage door opener. So what will happen to our animals that we're placing these RFIDs in with all this electronic pollution, electronic smog, if you will, is a real concern for me.
Well, and we've already found that the electromagnetic radiation emitted by RFID readers causes chromosome damage in animals. That study actually came out of the EU and was funded by the European Commission. So there's definitely, I think, the longer we live with this electrosmog and this pollution, the more we're going to find that we are jeopardizing our own health and obviously the health of our animals. If we put them in feedlots and have them going in and out of bedding and have these doorway readers every place that they're passing through, they're going to be essentially bombarded with a head-to-toe dose of electromagnetic radiation every time they do that. So, that raises its own set of issues, obviously. What does it do to the meat? I mean, these are open questions. What will it mean for the animals that we consume to be bombarded with this? And that brings me to another question I want to ask you, Celeste. In terms of to the average person listening to this broadcast who might live in a city, might live in a suburb, might have nothing to do with farming, may have never even been on a farm, how will this affect them? And I want to really get into the issue of health and safety, kind of more from what is the advantage of the small farm over the big factory farm issue. Can you address that for us?
Well, small farmers have a very personal vested interest. They want healthy animals. They provide a clean environment. You're going to get quality food. It's not going to be cookie cutter like you get at Walmart. It's going to have flavor. Remember the grapes of the old days, and the meat, the steak from the old days had so much flavor. And when you go to Walmart, their goal is to just have cookie cutter, the same fat content, the same color, the same texture meat. So you get the same thing every time. And they are saying that consumers find that desirable. But for me, I don't. One of my favorite childhood memories is eating those sweet grapes off my grandmother's vine, or eating a fresh chicken. Nothing compares.
We can't find it anymore. And, this uniformity is ultimately going to lead them to want to clone our beef. And that's something I think a small farmer would never consent to.
Right. And most farmers that I know are organic or as close to it as possible. They don't give their animals all the hormones and all the antibiotics. So when you buy local and fresh, you are getting a highly packed nutritional without any preservatives and pollutants in that food. So you're supporting local economy, and you're getting a very good product.
Well, as Judith was pointing out, many farmers live actually on the space that they farm. They've got a home right there next to where the animals are raised, and so you really don't want to be spraying toxic, poison chemicals if your baby's going to be playing in the backyard the next day. So I'm sure people are more conscientious just generally about what they're dosing and dousing their animals with in that regard.
Another interesting fact is that right now, our food, if you buy it from the grocery store, travels 1,300 miles to get to your plate, which means for every minute that it is on the road, it's losing its nutritional value. So you are not getting the nutritional value that you would if you went down the street and supported your local farmer.
So how do the NACE regulations impact local farmers, and why is it that we should be worried about the potential of losing local farmers because of this?
Well, several different things. I think one thing that everybody needs to understand is that these and it's not it doesn't spring to your mind, is it is interfering with your right of ownership, your absolute right of ownership, which we were given by our Constitution to be able to own and do with our property as long as we aren't interfering with someone else. So these regulations really affect that. As far as the premise ID, all these things are going to be a great revenue maker. Right now they're currently free, but they say that it's currently free. Later on, the sky's the limit. I mean, they could charge whatever. All these regulations are in draft form right now. The government has not been able to give us concrete numbers on what exactly it will cost us. I did do, for our 2 goats and 7 chickens, I did kind of run the numbers to see what it would cost us. And remembering that we're a non-commercial farm, so we don't bring any income in, I figured it would cost us $20,000.
And how?
How? Like the license, basically, remember when I was talking about financial incentive and to accept part of the package is to accept the whole thing?
Right.
You might think that NACE is the greatest thing and that it's needed, which it's really not. I want to assure folks there are some very good animal emergency laws on the books right now. So that issue has been addressed by the government. It doesn't invade privacy, and it doesn't cost the taxpayers anymore. And I'm having a senior moment here.
Oh. No, in terms of your $20,000, so
yeah.
You've got, yeah.
Okay, so basically what I did is, so you might think NACE is the greatest thing. But what you don't understand is the fine print that our states have each agreed to when they took NACE money is that they would implement the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Scenic Wild Rivers Act, all these executive orders which affect you. And then your property, what you do on your property is affected. So there's this piece of software that you can get that will keep you compliant environmentally with NACE, all the different things that they have plans for your land. That license alone is $6,000 for the software alone, and you don't even own the software. That's just one of the fees. Then you have your chip and your reader. You have to have a computer. You know, it goes on and on.
Well, and a lot of small farmers have chosen to be small farmers specifically because they don't want to be part of all of the modern, you know, the hustle and bustle of the technology world, and they don't want to have computers. So, you know, with this, I mean, I guess you'd have to have a computer. How else are you going to file a report with the federal government that you walked off your property with your horse and then walked back again? I guess you have to file that within, what's your time frame for filing
it's 48
a report like
hours.
that? So within 48 hours of essentially any movement of my animal off my property, I would have to file a report with the federal government?
Yes, IRS file. I mean, there's all this information that we take our goats for a walk every Sunday. So every property that we would encounter, I would have to do a report. And any animal that they encountered. So there's a horse park at the top of our hill. So if we ran across any horses on our walk, we would have to get their trade information, kind of like if you were in a car accident, and then get that information to the federal government. If you came to my house, I would have to take your personal information and keep that in a log so that if, God forbid, any of my animals got sick, I would be able to notify you and the government.
And so they can just knock on your door and say, hey, Celeste, we want to know everyone who's visited your home over the last 6 months. Every family member came for Thanksgiving, the neighbor who came over for tea, all of it. You'd have to report everything. Right.
Well, I have to keep a log on it, and then the trigger would be if one of our animals got sick.
Well, but you and I both know when you keep a log, the government can come in and demand that log at any time.
Right. Right.
So, you know, the mere act of requiring you, I mean, it would really feel to a small farmer as though every aspect of their lives was under scrutiny under this program.
It is. It would be.
So now tell me about the successes and some of the victories that you've had. I know that you've been working with other farmers, ranchers, and other people both in the state and around the country. Just so people don't feel completely discouraged, I want to leave people knowing that you're on the job and that Judith's on the job and people are on the case here. Give us a little bit of good news. What's been going right?
Well, the good, like Judith had mentioned, Missouri just passed in their Senate. It was 98-2, I believe, no NACE language. So we are really excited about that. And I really want to encourage folks to do something. Be a 10-minute citizen. 10 minutes a day, 6 days a week, do something. Educate a friend, letters to the editor, representatives, senators, educate them, read something that will get you educated. Just 10 minutes a day, that's a manageable amount, and it won't take too much time out of your busy day. And what is the impact of that? That is equal to 16,000 constituents if you do something with that information. One person is equal to 16,000 voices. And I was so excited when I went down to Olympia. No one knew what NACE was. No one knew who I was. By the end of the session, everybody knew what NACE was, and everybody knew who I was. And I was just one person. And that is really exciting news.
Well, and you're swaying an entire industry. You're swaying the entire state of Washington, where regardless of how these lawmakers intend to vote, or regardless of where their loyalties lie, whether it's with the big agribusinesses or with the small farmer, they at least know that there's a fight, and they're at least having to face their own consciences and having to make a conscious decision instead of just going with the status quo. And you really have yourself to thank for that, there are now people who are aware of this issue, and you still may not win. I mean, I face this every day in my own battles. We still may not win, but at least we've sort of outed the bad guys. You've got to go on record now as saying that you're going to openly support fascism instead of freedom, or you're going to openly support the big guys instead of the little guy. And, those are choices that I think were going on in the back rooms with handshakes and slaps on the back, and nobody was really aware of it. And I think you are living proof that one single individual, without a huge budget, without a big organization behind you, that you, just through dogged determination, have actually set this entire debate on its head and really opened it up. So, on behalf of everybody in this country who cares about freedom, I really want to thank you for what you've been doing up there in Washington State. I've got a couple of other things I want to cover before we're coming down to the last 10 minutes of the program. What do you really see in the long run? Let me take two scenarios. Let's take both a nightmare vision and a utopian sort of vision. What do you see happening in the next 10 or 15 years in this country around farming and raising animals for food in this country?
Well, right now I see that we're at a fork in the road. We can either give up our constitutional right to own property, and that includes our land and our animals, or we can say, no, we are going to take back what we have neglected in our Constitution, and we demand that our government be a constitutional government. So we're kind of at that fork of the road, and each one of us has to make a decision of which way they want to go. If you go the route of government control, that is not going to bring you security. I mean, we just saw that with Virginia, the Virginia shootings. What a tragedy. All this Homeland Security, all this police action, all these databases did not protect those people. And it's going to be the same way with our food supply. It is just plain not going to protect us, if we give them the control. If we choose to be responsible, buy local, demand a constitutional government, spend 10 minutes a day being a 10-minute citizen, we can gain back some of what we've lost. So I think there could be a very bright future. Even better, we could hand to our children and grandchildren a better government than we have.
Or maybe step back a few steps to the government that we were intended to have, which I think never would have tolerated any of this. I think the Founding Fathers, if they saw the NACE program, would be rolling over in their graves. So down the trajectory, down the potential nightmare trajectory, maybe we can motivate people to take you up on this 10-minute citizen activism approach. What do you think their next step's going to be? If they actually get away with this, if they actually can require everyone with a feed animal or an edible animal in the United States, or even horses, I guess, if they can require that level of registration, what do you think they'll go for next?
Well, basically, when you do a permit or a certificate, you are giving the government part control of your sole ownership. So you're basically giving them a cut, and they have a say of what you're going to be able to do from there on forward. And from what we've so far found, there's no opt-out. So you say, oh, my gosh, I've made a mistake. I thought that I could trust that this was a good program or whatever, just try and get out of it. I wrote a letter and I said, okay, since this program is voluntary and I did not give you my information, I will want all my information purged. And I wrote this to the Department of Ag in Washington State, and they said we refuse to purge your information. It's against the law for us to purge it.
Oh, my.
So once you're in, you can't get out. It's like an ant trap.
Wow. So now what if you decided to simply not comply? I mean, do they have provisions for what they're going to do? Do they do they quarter you and drag you behind a horse? I mean, what happens if you say, I simply am not going to tell you when I take my goats for a walk and we happen to pass the horse farm at the top of the road? What can they do to you? Well, in the state of Washington, they just passed some of those some consequences for not compliance, and it's $1,000 per animal per day per infraction to not comply. So we've chosen not to comply, and I guess time will tell within probably the next 3 months what the consequences of that will actually mean for us. Now, how many animals do you have that would fall under these regulations? Well, right now we have 2 pregnant milk goats and 7 chickens. So you would be subject to $9,000 a day for not complying with which regulations is it that you're thinking of? Well, if it's NACE or they have passed an enforcement of all animal health laws, which was 130 pages of regulations, they are actually going to be establishing within the next 3 months checkpoints on all of our roads to check everybody. Wait, say that again? In Washington, it was a almost unanimous vote on a bill, Senate Bill 5204, enforcement of animal health laws, which will establish checkpoints on all of our roads. And everyone will be stopped. And they will be able to, they're going to check you for your driver's license, check you for animal papers. If you have animals, make sure all your documentation make sure you have your license, car insurance, that type of thing. So they're going to have actual checkpoints in Washington. And who authorized this and under what? The legislature just passed it. And what was it called, or what's this a part of? It was Senate Bill 5204, and it was almost unanimous, except when I called my 2 representatives and said, why did you vote this way? 2 of them changed their vote. Okay, so they're going to be able to stop any vehicular traffic and ask you if you've been in a farm, if you're transporting animals? Not only that, but they're going to be checking you, your tires, your car insurance. It is going to be a regular checkpoint. Like when you go across the border, they are going to have those throughout Washington. And especially if you have an animal, you have to make sure that you have that animal tagged and that you have the proper documentation. Otherwise, you'll get even more fines than the $1,000. That's the bottom line, or the baseline. It can go up from there. And what is the justification for this? Animal disease, supposedly, and yet they're letting undocumented diseased cattle come across from Canada, and that's okay, but everybody within the states has to have all these draconian animal ID, NACE type documentation. Wow, so I asked for a nightmare scenario, and we don't even need to look to the future for this one more than a couple of months when they set up the checkpoints. Yes. It's actually even more than the checkpoints. It was 130 pages of regulations, and there were 3 hearings, and people objected in writing. They came to the meetings. The meeting rooms were overfilled. They couldn't even fit everyone in the rooms, and yet they're going to proceed and implement these regulations. Well, we are heading straight to something. I don't know what, but, the good news, I got to say, is people are waking up. They are waking up, and that's exciting. Yeah, I've been working in the trenches for 7-8 years now. I know you've been doing this for since 2005, so you've got about 2 years under your belt. And can't you feel the shift? It's like the bad guys have kind of stepped on the accelerator, but on our side of the fight, people are really paying attention. I mean, they've actually started to say, you know what, something's wrong here, and I'm going to do something about it.
And that's been the exciting thing, is it's not just been, oh, yeah, that's wrong. They're actually picking up the telephone. It was so exciting when I was down in the session, and I had my laptop, and we were running into some trouble, so I sent out this email. Within 5 minutes, the representatives and senators started getting phone calls, and they knew where it came from.
Oh, isn't that fantastic? Now, for people in Washington State, how can they get on that list? So when you send those out from the State House, they hear directly from you and can pick up the phone themselves.
They can sign up at nonacelaude.org and put their name and their email address, and I will add them to my email list. And like I said, it goes out about once a week.
And that's nonacewa.org?
Yes.
All right. Celeste, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program to talk about this important issue. If our listeners want to learn more or communicate directly with Celeste, they can go to www.nonacewa.org. Our guest this hour has been Celeste Bishop, and you've been listening to Uncovering the Truth with your host, Dr. Katherine Albrecht. We'll be back tomorrow with more we'll be back on Monday with more eye-opening information. Meanwhile, have a great weekend, and may God richly bless you all. Bye-bye.